I think I'm here. Am
You're,
I here?
you're here. You're here. You're using every last
You're somewhere.
Where am I?
of available time.
All right.
All good. Let's see. Cool. Let me pull up my slides. I started recording. And what am I trying to do? This is what I'm trying to do. Of course now. Hey, Lynn, how's it going?
Going pretty well. I've even had some sun this morning, so that's always a plus.
That's more than what I can say. It is dreary outside.
Yeah, we got a rain shower, which we need, but then the sun came out for at least a little bit, so we'll see what happens this afternoon.
All right. Okay, that disappeared on me. There we go. All right, I assume everyone's seeing my screen. Okay, let's get started. Welcome to your always the wrong screen. Hold on. Then I have to remember which screen is which. That's that one. I think it's this one. There we go. All right, now welcome to your March CI Mastermind live session. We have James Ricci with us. He's been a regular, so he kind of knows the drill. As always, the session is going to be recorded. So don't say anything that you don't want to have recorded. I had somebody tell me that recently. I'm like, oh yeah, I guess so. Always like to see faces, helps us interact with you. Of course, we like these to be engaging sessions. Feel free to use the chat to introduce yourself or to ask questions. I think a lot of you are regulars today, so most of you probably know each other. I'll do a short introduction here. I'll hand it over to James. Of course, we've got your responses to our monthly question, and I'll use those to create some conversation. CI Mastermind Live is a monthly discussion with CI professionals or those that are CI interested. That's continuous improvement. Keep the groups around 5 to 20 people so we can have good engaged discussion. Do some brief learning. Try and focus on some real intros and interactions so that you have something you can take back to your jobs. And we do that through rotational format. Always respect the other folks on the phone, please. Realize that we are recording and you don't want to make things public that shouldn't be public. And try and help each other. So jump in there. You all have wealth of experience and can help each other out in the problem solving space. Okay. All right. For those of you that weren't on last month, I was talking about our Leader Standard Work program. I had been talking in January about Leader Standard Work in general and just how powerful it is, and that we created an offering around it. In fact, this group helped me create that offering and is focused on helping leaders create a standard for their day and then track and manage and monitor that standard. Our approach is to look at it as both an artifact and a process. So it's not just a piece of paper, but it's what you do with that piece of paper, validating that we covered off on the things that we need to cover off on. In fact, I just got off the phone with one of my Leader Standard Work clients, and he said, Matt, I need to know how many hours, how much time people are really spending on the floor. He said, I shouldn't be on the floor more often than my supervisors. And I said, okay, let's take a look at the Leader Standard Work that they're doing and how can we add something to it that drives that compliance, that drives that as a validation or verification that people are actually spending the time on the floor that they need to. So those are the kind of conversations that get created through this program. We've had a really good experience with our clients using it. And with them, we typically start just by training them, building a template that establishes their daily, weekly, monthly activities, and creating a dashboard that allows them to track it. And I have kind of a cool bit of feedback from one of our clients that I'll share with you all on that topic. And then making sure that there's a cadence that drives the discussion, because frankly, again, if it's just an artifact, it's really not doing its job. The value add that I see is people asking what certain things mean. Like, we're gonna do a 5S check every day, every day. What does that actually mean? Does it mean that we're just sweeping, or does it mean that we're actually seeing if something is out of place and putting it back into place? Or even just job responsibilities and how they flow down or get delegated. Those conversations are all created by the review cadence. Okay. So like I said, we have got some really great feedback, and two pieces that I enjoyed and just got very recently was our client said, we're gamifying the things that are important to improve our management of operations, which I kind of thought was cool. I didn't really think of leader standard work as a gamification, but if played honestly, right? And that's something that you have to make sure happens in delivery of leader standard work. If played honestly, you get to see every week that, oh, I didn't get time to do my continuous improvement activity this week, or I really wanted to do a waste walk, but I didn't get to it, and here's why. And you kind of gamify it and see how different people are performing their leader standard work. And then he also said in that same session, he said, I've thrown a lot of tools at the organization. This is the one I'm most proud of. So super excited about this program. And I would just ask that if you know someone, have someone that you think could benefit from this, if you would introduce them to me, I would appreciate that. And with that, I'm going to get on into our, I'm going to tell you about April. So in April, we have Ken Place. Ken is someone that I've worked with on some projects here and there. He has got a great quality background, and he's going to come in and talk about optimizing your quality management system performance. He's going to share some specific tools like turtle diagrams. Who's used a turtle diagram or even heard of one? Yes? Okay, me and Yost. So I hadn't used a turtle diagram until I met Ken, and we were kind of in a situation where we had to look across an organization, kind of decide what processes really needed some documentation and what did we need in that documentation. And I'm not going to tell you all about turtle diagrams. We're going to let Ken do that. But it's a really useful tool, and one of those tools that I think not enough people know about. I certainly didn't. And so it's been something we've built into some of our projects going forward. And so he's going to talk about some of those structures that he uses, and hopefully you guys can take those back and use them yourselves. All right. Now, James Ricci is here to talk about de-risking your automation deployments. Just a note on this, and I'm looking around the room at who's here. I think for most of you, you're probably going to be more interested in let's say, the digital side of automation. But I think there are a couple of you on this call that are probably interested in physical automations. And so we'll try and talk a little bit about both. But we recognize that a lot of the questions that I saw were really around, the implementation of software tools and things like that are going to automate. So we might spend a little bit more time there. So that's just an opening note. And other than that, I'm going to hand it off to you, James, to introduce yourself and the topic.
All right. Thanks, Matt. Good morning, or actually good afternoon, everybody. I think we're all in the afternoon at this point. For those of you who aren't familiar with my background, I'm going to put it up on the screen here real quick. But I'm not going to go through it all. So, big piece here is I've worked with Matt for a number of years, been doing a lot of consulting work over the past, call it 25 plus years. I'll date myself and probably could go with 30 plus at this point, and spending a lot of time in manufacturing. But as it relates to this particular topic, I've been doing a lot of work in what I'm going to call the Industry 4.0 technology side, kind of aligning the worlds of technology with, the more what I'm going to call manufacturing 101, blocking and tackling. As part of that, though, I've spent a lot of time in what I'm going to call the upfront part of the processes. So I think jokingly, I'll refer to things here today as the carpeted side of the business versus the non-carpeted side of the business. And any slides that I pull up here, I'm pretty sure I can share those with the group, either because it's readily available, or at this point, I don't care, or the stuff's been anonymized such that it's fine. So there's a lot of topics in there, and the carpeted side of the business, again, is really everything that it takes to get a product to the shop floor, right? And so it could be all the way up front on the sales side through program management. It can be quoting, it could be you name it. And then it, transitions eventually to making that particular widget. What I find interesting is, and I'm going to open it up to the group, or Matt can help me open it up to the group, but the question was really around describing a technology investment that you've kind of make or you plan to make in the next 12 months, and try to put some boundaries around the discussion was around what problem are you actually trying to solve, and what risks do you see associated with it? And so it looked like there was a lot of questions around the sales process, to be honest with you, which was pretty interesting. And I want to open it up to the group to maybe anybody else want to clarify things that they'd like to get out of this. It'll help me with, if I want to display certain slides or whatever to kind of engage the conversation better, I can do that. But do people want to chime in on some things that they were particularly interested in, with like, hey man, if I could get X, Y, or Z out of this next whatever half hour to 40 minutes, what would that be? Oh, come on. This is bad. Go on, come on. People got to go off mute. Let's go.
I'll chime in.
Cool.
So I'm working to get to my sales organization, but we're not there yet. So I guess I'll start with an easier one. Customer service for us right now is doing a lot of manual data entry. And so I've just been exposing myself to some no-code workflow type solutions. So I've been looking at that. And I think some of the questions I have are around that were prompted by the question, like what risks are there and what should I be looking out for as we move towards kind of automating some of these types of things in our business?
Good questions. So this goes back to, you're saying, like, what are we trying to accomplish? What are we trying to get out of this thing? We're trying to automate process steps. And so the big thing you're going to have to remember is, and it's, again, most people know this, but you're talking people, process, and technology. Those are the three things that have to work together. And so the technology bit, while that consumes like 80% of people's time and attention, it accounts for like 20% of the failures. So the failure is in the people and the process side. And so as you're walking through this, there's a we know what problem we're trying to solve. We want to automate this. We want to make this quicker, and again, we want to make this more efficient, and we have to ask ourselves, like, more efficient relative to what? So a lot of times what I'll try to do starting out is actually go backwards in the process and actually go pretty old school. And I'll show you a slide of pretty darn old school here, of a slide that I would consider to be that. Let me just put it in share mode here. Can everybody see my slide?
Not yet.
Not yet.
All right, let me try this again.
There it is.
Yeah, it's coming up. Yep.
So this is as old school as it gets around doing a process flow diagram. So if you are starting out saying, hey, I got this customer service process, it's pretty manual, you're going to want to ask yourself, where is it manual? Where is it not manual? So if you're looking here, what you're seeing is the yellow this again is a specific system. The yellow, blue, and green represent what I'll call 3 distinct kind of work streams. The yellow represents common work steps. As we walk through this process with a cross-functional team, all the red sticky notes represent issues, problems that they're having. These could be technical problems, they could be anything. And as I walk through these processes, what I will do is often put a little dot, so to speak, on any of these process steps to indicate whether it's manual, semi-automated, or automated, just to understand. So visually, again, you can kind of get a look at this. So we actually work through this process to really highlight all the issues. Now, the question is, why is that important? And it's important because when you switch to something different, right, you want to automate these workflows. As you switch to these, you're ultimately going to change your process. And this is where you get into this situation where, the tail is wagging the dog, right? Suddenly the technology might be driving the process, and it might be driving the process in a way that everybody's like, I don't like that. I don't like what this is doing. And again, if you don't know what problem you're trying to solve, you can get hung up in like, well, the technology doesn't do it exactly the way we want to do it. Fair enough. But if it's solving 90% of the other sets of problems and you got to tweak your process a little bit, you want to know that going in. So laying out your process and laying out who's doing those work steps becomes kind of critically important before you now you have a very clear picture of what all the issues are. And now when you go out and say, I got to select a technology tool to do this, you're in a better spot to know what problems you're trying to solve. Scott, I see you got, I think, Joseph, I think you got a problem or a question.
A question. I see that, I recognize the pattern, yeah, and I guess my question is about change management, but I see that often you may have a compelling case for implementing your new technology. And then when you start talking about it and proposing a solution, you actually see that resistance starts popping up. Yeah, and I'm not sure. My business context is a bit different than you guys. I'm working in Italy, and there are a lot of small and medium companies with business owners being like a family business, and then I'm not sure if that makes the distinction, but it shows you that they very often are very skeptical about, well, first of all, new technology. Nowadays, people start saying, well, listen, we know that we need to go digital. Yeah. But when you then start talking, okay, that means that you need to change this and that, and then,
right.
And then immediately the resistance goes
Kicks
up.
in. Yep.
Yeah. So that's how do you discern that, first of all, and then second, so what is your in your experience, what is your mitigation?
Yeah. So 2 things. One, first is a fun fact about Italy. I'm actually of Italian descent, and so I've been over there quite a bit. So I think the number is 90% of all Italian businesses have fewer than 15 employees, or 15 employees or fewer.
I think it's even higher than that, but yeah.
Yeah, it is almost,
exactly.
There's so few that have a ton of employees. It's really interesting. So what you bring up is what I call sort of it's the change management problem here, which is people and technology don't change at the same rates. So this idea that you can, you're like, let's face it, everybody loves to talk about AI these days, but how that's impacting the workplace and where the technology is at isn't necessarily where, kind of where things are at people process wise. So there's a lag there. So for me, I always try to recognize what this chart here shows, which is basically, I got a lot of risk because my people and my processes aren't changing the same way that the technology does. So you sort of need to step back and really understand, again, what problems you're trying to solve. If I get into when I'm involved with small businesses, whether that's in the US, I would characterize really, small businesses as really being 100 employees and fewer. You're dealing with the owners, and you got to ask the question, what is it that's going to motivate that particular individual? What is it that their problems they're trying to solve? And if I want to go in and quote unquote do something and make an improvement, if they don't see the personal benefit to them, then you're not going to get the buy-in. So every step of the way, that process applies all the way down, and you have to start looking at where each person is going to get a benefit. And it becomes very selfish. So if you're going into a customer service element, what you have to recognize, kind of back to your example, Scott, it's like, okay, management might think like, hey, this is great. We're automating all these tasks and now everything's going to be automated. The people who are doing the manual tasks right now, they may in fact like doing the manual tasks because it keeps them from doing maybe some other customer service task that's harder. Quite honestly, they can't do it and talk to their cube mate at the same time, whatever. You have to realize what those things are, and you have to figure out what is it that they're going to get out of it that's going to make them go, yeah, I'm on board with this. And I'll be honest with you, you're never going to get 100% buy-in. It's great. Sometimes like you hit a home run and it's like everybody hates something and it's like such a no-brainer. It's not a problem. But often you're going to get into a situation where, the organization is going to get a quantum step forward, but one or two particular individuals, their job function is going to change and may change dramatically. And that's a risk point because they may not be comfortable with that. And you're going to have to start understanding, is that the right, and if that risk is large enough and that person's not really, again, skilled or competent, and I don't mean competent in a negative term, but I'm actually, in fact, has the skill sets and capabilities to perform the new function, then you need to know that ahead of time. And that's part of that sort of graph that I was showing. That's that risk in the middle that you've got to manage. So I'm not sure if I totally answered your question, Joseph, but it is almost blocking and tackling of motivation on almost like on an individual level basis. So when I make those process flow charts and we've got people in the room, we're also taking stock with data. So similar to what Matt was talking about around leader standard work, we'll often do task inventories to really understand where people are spending their time. And so they'll do a log, and I've got some templates. They'll do a log and calculate where they're spending all their time. And you can kind of get to the whole value add, non-value add, but you can also get to, but this person spends 90% of their time processing paperwork, and they're probably not going to be super comfortable with a future in which we've decided to automate 90% of their job because they don't know what they're going to do then.
I have that right now with the workflow tool that we are implementing. It should have gone live in September. And every time we get close, the individual that really owns the process, who frankly does know the most about the process, finds some new requirement that we have to add, and it's making the software folks nuts. And we're actually finally at a point where we have to go and say, really all we're looking for is a soft launch. Like that's another way that I address these sorts of things is I look for small launches that would allow us to prove things out for people that are uncomfortable. But that's what it keeps pushing out. And we're finally going to go to the client and say, look, I don't know, the leadership may be serious about this, but the administrator clearly is not. I think the person thinks this is like you're saying, James, like a attack on their job. But if you're serious about it, you kind of have to just go do it. And face that maybe there could be a couple requirements that are still important, But frankly, you learn that from the soft launch and the customer. But I don't know, short of just kind of pulling the trigger in a small way, I don't know how you break some of that resistance. James, I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that, but
Yeah, I mean, again, and I'll preface this by saying always everything's easier said than done. But the other element of this is when you map out you got to know what your process is. You got to map out that process, and you got to figure out who owns those process steps, because then there's an element of there's a person who's accountable or responsible for doing that and following that process. So like we talk about sales, and so you know, I'm sure people have heard of a RACI or a RASIC chart, or it gets pronounced 10 different ways from Sunday. But so here's an example of one that's related to sales and the sales process. And it's call it you see there's 23 process steps, and we've laid out who's responsible for each part of that process, who owns it, who's accountable, who's informed, the idea of who's, I use the term, whose head rolls if this doesn't work. Like, you can delegate responsibility, but you can't delegate accountability. So, so you take this type of approach and you're like, okay, I know people may not like this, or there might be resistance here, but if I know who's responsible and accountable for that process step, me as a leader, I have somebody I can go to say, hey, this is what we signed up for. This is what you signed up for. We got to do this. And again, it's not perfect. It's easier said than done. People don't like conflict. People don't like to be held. A lot of people don't like to be held accountable. But these are like tools to kind of at least box in.
And actually, kind of in that spirit, we didn't go deep enough into the process. So by not going deep enough, we left the decision making in the hands of an individual that didn't have the aligned incentives to want to move forward. And that's something you have to look out as well. And this, I think, goes back to what some of James's points, like, what are the incentives of the people in there, and who has what power, right? Because if this is a person that ultimately says, yep, this thing can go forward, and that person doesn't have aligned incentives, you're gonna run into problems.
I also think that you need to consider your field of vision. I'm calling it field of vision. It's how big the problem needs to be solved, of how many teams have to be involved, and how big is this process issue. Because you're hired maybe by the sales team, right? They don't care about what happens in the dock or anything else, right? So say you automate the sales process, you increase sales by, I don't know, 100%. I'm just saying as an example, right? Can that extra demand be handled by that back end process, right? I mean, it's hard when you're only being, you're asked to fix something in a bubble, and then the rest of the bubble breaks, and and then there's a flood everywhere,
Right.
So.
Yeah. It's an interesting point. Like, the first sort of sticky note process that I put up there, the issue was there was a handoff to manufacturing. This particular product had a really short lead time. They had to basically get everything out the door from order entry to order delivery in like 17 days. And it was spending 2 days. It was spending 10 of those 17 days on the carpeted side of the business to get the order to manufacturing, so that the manufacturing was given less than 7 days to make sure it's right and get it shipped out. And they're like, so there was 2 questions there. It was like, well, we want to grow the business, and it's like, well, we've got to scale our ability to get these orders into the system and get them to manufacturing. But to your point, Joe, there was also, I'm looking at it going, that's fine. Can manufacturing then also if we're going to, as you said, illustratively double sales, do we have the back end that can actually still meet lead time for that? So it is harder when you're if you're the farther you're down in the organization to know what's on each side, like what I call supply side, demand side functions, right? And big demand is like the overall market, little demand, little smaller d is like sort of demand within the organization. And you have the supply to do that. And that's something that is, if you're not in the right position of the organization, you know, you can just essentially just as take Herbie and just move them to a different spot in the business, right? And that's what you end up doing.
And it can happen even in a small project. I mean, if they just give you a project that says, like, I'll use an example, increase your throughput on the dock, right? But you're only looking at to increase that throughput on the dock, but your guys in, you know, that have to put it away, right? They can't put it away because it's too much. Now it's just backing up over by them, right? So,
right.
You know, you have to look at it. You got to come up with that I call it field of vision, but it's whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, you've got to pick your beginning and your end points of what you're trying to do. And you know, that becomes the question of, when we pick the end point, if we theoretically double our capacity or our throughput actually of this point, like, is that match what's going on? And that's a really valid point, because there may be costs to doubling it. The cost may be different if I only have to increase it by 50% instead. And if the bottleneck is going to move to that next spot and I only can get 50%, it might not make any sense to put the infrastructure, put the cost, put the investment in to double, when doubling, I won't actually get double because of a bottleneck.
Well, unless they want to move the people from one place to the other, and maybe that will help the throughput. But you know, it all depends, right, on what you're
right.
Yeah. I want to bring in Modesto, and Modesto, hopefully you're listening in here. I see you're okay, good. Because you kind of detailed out a streamlining project with multiple technologies, and I think it would be interesting for you to describe that a little bit to this group, and then James, maybe hearing it, you can give Modesto some pointers on where he should be thinking about risk. Does that work?
That sounds good for me. Hopefully, you guys are gonna be able to understand what I'm gonna try to describe.
You're gonna. I almost couldn't. I almost couldn't understand it, Modesto. So you're gonna have to. You have to explain it slowly for me.
Okay. So I'm the senior product designer. I'm at a small company here in Chicago. We manufacture high-end awards. So we are like the McDonald's of design. We need to design on demand. Right, we have only a certain amount of time to work in projects, and the projects is basically is the same steps, same manufacturing technology. The only thing that changes is the shapes or the material in the process. Okay, so we are a team of 3 designers, and we spend countless hours in doing the same thing over and over and over. So thankfully, technology is, you know, evolving and making it easier for designers like me to use that technology and take advantage of technology and cut processes, right? So the biggest issue that we have is we get the requirement from the customer, we got certain budget, and for us, the other 2 designers don't have the manufacturing background. So it's very hard for them to accurately design something that has a specific budget. Sometimes we are under and we leave money on the table, or sometimes are over that we ended up losing the project. All right. So I use a program called Rhino. I don't know if anybody is familiar with. It's used a lot for product design and architecture. But that Rhino 3D has a plugin called Grasshopper. Grasshopper is basically a visual programming language. So I don't need to know programming to be able to execute a bunch of sequences that is gonna automate the process. Okay, so so Grasshopper is very parametric type of modeling. And now, if you know programming, I know just a little bit, you can expand the capability of Grasshopper, and you can program in 3 or 4 different languages. The language that I'm using with Grasshopper is Python. Okay, so the goal to build this configurator was for the designers to be able to have a feedback or the final price of the product. So the logic is, we start by getting the request from the customer, size, budget, quantity, and then we go into the same steps, modeling, specing for the coding department, and doing rendering for the customers to, to try to sell it. So, and the processes are the same: modeling, specing, then we send the specs to quoting, which are not very detailed specs, just rough specs for the quoting department to get an estimate of the price. So what the configurator has done, and thanks to all the classes that I've been taking with Matt in continuous improvement, I was able to go to every single department and document all the steps and all the time that each department takes. So I take that information and plug it into Grasshopper. So I got the modeling configuration done, and I have the specing configuration done. But now the beauty about technology is, all the information I have there that I can access and create components and sequences to get like cutting time for a laser, depending on the thickness of the type of material. I have, I know so much about the information about the particular product that I can determine edge finishing time, because I know the travel of the machine, I know the speed of the machine, and I know the length of the new object, right? So, and then stuff like that. And manual step 2, like wrapping, I was amazed on how many steps it takes to wrap a product. And
you don't know until you look. You don't know until you look.
Yeah, and that was a bottleneck. And the biggest issue that I found on wrapping is, boxes come flat. And for us, the product is changing every time. So we don't know, the sizes are different every time. And the guy, the manager in the wrapping department for the particular time study that I was doing, he needed to go back and forth 3 times to assemble the box. He said, oh no, this box is too small. Went back, oh, that's too big. And that's time. It took him like 6 minutes just to find the box. So, and then I was thinking, how can I help this process, right? I know the box location. I will know the final size of the product. And so I was able to use a Python program that is allow determining in the inputs of what we have in the front end, give me the overall size, talking to the wrapping department to see how much room do I have, between the box and the product to put the bubble wrap around. So we
So Modesto, sorry, because I want to, because you're hitting on some good points that I don't want to miss, and I want to understand. So you are in the middle of implementing this automation, is that right?
Yes.
And how's it going?
It's going pretty good. So the modeling part and the manufacturing steps are done. Right now, I'm trying to get help from the quoting department to help me with the markups.
And
okay.
And yeah, one second though. So from the group, like, did you hear some of the stuff that Modesto is doing that ties right into what James was suggesting? No? James, did you hear it? I heard it.
I heard some. Why don't you? Well, I'll let you elaborate first, though.
So one of the things that I think we put in the tagline for this session was understanding the process that you're automating. And one of the things that Modesto said was he went to each of the people, right? And James talked about understanding the people that are going to be interacting and understanding what they're doing, because ultimately you may be finding that you can just eliminate some of what they're doing. It doesn't need to be automated at all, although that's not what it sounds like Modesto found. But you are going to know specifically how to automate their job, right? And this is, I think, especially problematic in the software automation space, because we buy so much off the shelf software that does not actually fit our process. So you're either going to need to use something like low code, like Scott was mentioning earlier, or you're going to have to understand that software. You're going to understand how to change your process to fit the software. But the only way that you're going to get into that is by doing what Modesto was saying, which is going around, talking to people, timing the process, documenting. Like, it's tedious. It's tedious, and we skip the step because it's tedious. But then we are in trouble later when the software doesn't actually take care of that process that person was running. And Modesto, correct me if I got anything wrong in there.
No, man, you hit the point. So what it allowed me to do is document it every single step, how we are doing it now. And that information is the information that is going into the configurator. But also, allow me to go back when we are up. Right now, we just want the logic to work. And then we can optimize the program to execute the command faster.
And
like
you're
that.
building in parts. It sounds like you're building in pieces versus trying to design an entire system and deploy it all at once. Is that true?
That's the beauty about it. Yep. So
Iterative.
Yes, iterative.
Yeah. The most important part was to get the feedback for the price. Okay. So now for this particular product, we don't need to send the information to the quoting department. We just got it right there in front of us. And it's gonna allow to write an Excel, to export the information to Excel and then to plug it into our system. And yeah, it's pretty amazing. And I'm not a good programmer, so I'm using ChatGPT to write the Python code for me. And because I know what I need to know for the program to do, I can go back and forth until the program works. And I mean, it's amazing.
The other thing I think I heard in there, I'm not sure. I think I did hear it though, which is you kind of automate these processes, and the more you're talking to each person on these steps, and you know what they need, you may find out that you can push information to people, and I'm using that term push, but sooner, which gives them actually, in fact, more lead time. And what you've done is you've taken a process and you've taken something off the critical path. So before it was going to go from this group to this group to this group, and it was linear. Now you've sort of taken something and you've automated it, and it's feeding a separate process. And now that person doesn't need to necessarily wait. And then they can get started on whatever they need to do. And then you could figure out, well, what is it? What other pieces of information do you need? Then they're able, you go from this situation to this situation. And if you're in a world where there's a tight lead time, that's a big benefit.
Exactly, James. And you hit a point early on. I mean, if the logic works, there is little error for mistakes. So the program is always gonna, output whatever we set it to do. So, and for us, coding is a guessing game. You guess here, you guess there. But when you have the mathematical information, that is the price is gonna be very close to real.
Scott, you've got a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's come up a couple times, just mentioned the investment in this automation piece of it. And I totally agree with you, Lynn and Matt, saying you got to go people and process first and then you automate. But so in some of the stuff we're looking at, I'm just wondering how you guys are looking at the decision to invest in automation in terms of what decision points there are, because from my side, I keep getting ROI. What's the ROI? And I know that there's more to it than just the dollar return on it.
And Scott, okay, that's what I was going to ask you. Are you talking purely dollar ROI or?
Yeah, dollar. Yeah. So I'm seeing bigger than that, but I'm talking to my managers and maybe that's not what they're seeing. So.
Does anybody want to take Scott's question?
I would have a counter question maybe. So you see additional benefits, or can they not be translated in dollar value too?
They can be.
Like quality improvements, for example.
Yeah,
for your
I'm talking
product,
like employee capability and future development of that, and redeploying people at a higher skill set than they currently are being used at. I think is, I could potentially get there, but maybe that's something I could work on. Yeah, thanks, Juice.
And speed also is a cash flow item. So, and I don't know if you're talking about speed, but sometimes we don't properly put an ROI on speed because we're not thinking about cash flow and the cost of cash. Lynn has her hand up.
Yeah, just for Scott, in terms of establishing ROI, one of the things that I wound up running into a lot when I was trying to do automation, this is now about 1.5 years ago since I've done it, so I am sure the field has moved on even since then, was looking at how much variation, especially in your input, you have, because that created a lot of complexity and made it really fragile, and you had to spend a lot of time maintaining the systems, because whatever site or database would make a change and it would break everything in the automation. So that I think is really part of why you want to look at the processes first and kind of evaluate how much really repetition there is and how many decisions points have to be made. And that's where I think I would be interested to see, even in that 1.5 years since I did it, I wasn't using anything with AI enabled. And I'm sure that's going to increase the cost, but that should, in theory, also allow you to handle a lot more decision points in terms of seeing what you're getting in. Maybe something is very custom, like what Modesto was getting, and being able to adjust it, because unfortunately my experience was that there were just a lot of limitations that we didn't know up front. And so I would have discussions around processes, and I'd say, yeah, this program that we bought cannot read a PDF file and do anything with it. And we had tons of PDF files. So you do need to do that work up front to understand what your needs are, and then look at what your options for automation are, because some things we said we don't need this fancy program. We can do it with something in Excel, or we can just get the two programs to pass the data back and forth, and not have to have a third program come in and manipulate it. So I guess it's a long-winded way of saying do all that upfront work to understand what your needs truly are, and then figure out what the automation is, rather than starting with automation and saying, what can I do with it?
I agree.
Yeah, the build off of that is, I think there's a scaling thing too. If we're talking about an ROI and we're talking about Salesforce, okay, this huge multi-million-dollar implementation, there's one set of ROI stuff that's going on. If we're talking about some of the stuff that maybe Modesto was doing, where he was taking it in chunks, if you take this sort of pilot mentality to things, you're reducing the cash outlay for the technology. You may find that, like, my thing, and I'm doing this I'm at a plant doing some work, and what I found was the plant manager and the controller have a budget that they don't have to get approval to purchasing to do anything if it's less than $50,000. So we now have three $49,000 projects. So, right. So, it's this game that you kind of have to play. And some of the things, like, I don't know, has anybody heard of the term vibe coding?
No.
So do your little Google search on vibe coding. It's becoming much more popular. It's sort of a build off of what Modesto was talking about with using ChatGPT for coding, but you can literally get a tool that will allow you to essentially make a one-off application. So you can develop a customized application and basically have AI write the code for you, and then integrate it into your system. And it's relatively inexpensive. I'll be the first one to say I am not the vibe coding guy, but like you're going to find people in your organization, especially I'd say the younger workforce, that's probably a little less afraid of things like that. And you can put those in for really inexpensive, prove out what you want to do. That gives you ROI data to say, hey, look, we don't want to rely on, Ken in accounting who does this on the side, and we kind of need to formalize this thing. Now we know what the requirements are. Now we know what we need. We can sort of do something a little bit more formalized than maybe a vibe coded solution. But this pilot isn't necessarily a bad idea because the ROI requirement's a lot lower.
Okay, just in the interest of respecting everyone's time, because I know I'm over. James, any last thoughts or comments?
I will let you wrap it up, my friend.
Good. I thought that was a great conversation. The only thing that was kind of bouncing around my head when I heard some of these things is I don't know that you always need to automate. Like sometimes the best thing is to understand the process, because you realize that, I think maybe Lynn, you said it, you know what, we're more flexible and we can kind of get by with some of these spreadsheets. So I'm not convinced that you always need to automate. Sometimes I think we get charmed by the flashiness. With that said, though, I think, like Modesto, what you're doing makes a ton of sense. Dive in, understand the process, and start automating the pieces that clearly are manual, repetitive, and unnecessary. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, James. As always, we will put the recording out for everyone, and we will hopefully see you all next month. Have a great day.
Take care,
Thank you very
everybody.
Bye,
much.
guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.